Good morning or afternoon. It is Thursday, February 2nd? No, 3rd. Yeah, there it is. It's February 3rd. What day is it? I've been gone for so long. All right, so for today, you're going to be reading this article and answering some questions like a lot of other reading quizzes that you've done for me in the past. This one is about a very significant event that's going to wrap up some of the history that I think you need to know before we get into our discussion on the philosophy of government. Um, so, just a quick recap from this week. On Monday, you had a current event. What that event is, I don't know, but I do know that I've taught you how countries interact with one another, how a citizen should act, and more importantly, um, just like general broad thinking of things like the philosophy of pretty much anything. You have those big questions up on the board there. Still, they should still be there. Make sure you've written down some thoughts front and back on a piece of paper. Um, on Tuesday, you had your high school classes scheduled. Congratulations! If you were here, you got scheduled. Boom. You earned that cash for your early award scholarship. And on, you also got a little essay to write there. You should have written that. And if it's not done yet, that's okay. I want that to be done. That is also an early award scholarship. Um, should have finished that up yesterday. So that leads us to today. We're getting back to some history. This war, this conflict, set up a lot of the issues that we're going to learn about um, in this class because these issues after this war um, were highly significant. This war was very expensive, like any other war, um, and how England was going to pay for it had a huge influence on the creation of this country. So I want you to learn about this war, the 7 Years' War or the French and Indian War. It pretty much like I call it the 7 Years' War because um, when I was in England, I was taking a class on the history of the American Revolution from the um, British perspective. And I learned more about William Pitt than I care to ever know. You won't need to know anything about William Pitt other than just his basic policies for this war. Um, there's a question on Mr. Pitt. Um, so pay attention to his strategy. Pay attention to a pretty important figure who happened to become a US president that was fighting in this war. And more importantly, I say more importantly in law, um, this war really had an influence on how people in the colonies thought about the colonies. For a long time, they considered themselves English. And this war was fought essentially between two world powers at the time, France and England. But think about how fighting for your home is going to change how you feel about what you call your home. A lot of ourselves consider ourselves to be American, but we also live in the state of Indiana. We're Hoosiers. So, stuff to think about. Let's get to the article. Um, before I get to reading it, I suppose I should. Hmm, let's just get to it. No need to beat around the bush. I've already probably talked longer than you wanted me to, so let's get to it. All right, the French and Indian War, aka the 7 Years' War. Round four of the global struggle between England and France began in 1754. Unlike the three previous conflicts, this war began in America. French and British soldiers butted heads with each other over control of the Ohio Valley, which just think of the Ohio Valley being Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Kentucky, Tennessee, that sort of thing. At stake were the lucrative fur trade and access to the all important Mississippi River, the lifeline of the frontier to the west. A squadron of soldiers led by a brash, unknown 22-year-old George Washington attacked a French stronghold named Fort Duquesne. Soon after the attack, Washington's troops were forced to surrender. Shortly after that, a second British force also met with defeat. When news of this reached London, war was declared, and the conflict known in Europe as the 7 Years' War began. Americans would call this bout the French and Indian War. The first phase of this war was a sheer disaster for Britain. Assaults on French territory ended in bitter defeat. The French and their indigenous American allies inspired fear on the British frontier by burning and pillaging settlements. The French struck within 60 miles of Philadelphia. Americans were disheartened. They believed that Britain was not making the proper commitment to North America. So just real quick. So the British are getting smacked up, and the British can't have that. The British and French are fighting for control of this new territory, which, if you think back to the colonization stuff from last week, there's a reason why I wanted you to learn about the relationships between Native Americans and these colonizing powers. There's a reason why I wanted you to know about the fur trade. It's expensive. Countries wanted that. And now we have this sentence here. The colonists, believed that Britain was not making the proper commitment to North America. That being said, that will be a big turning point for us as a country. The turning point in the war came when William Pitt took over the wartime operations. He believed North America was critical for England's global domination. Pitt turned recruitment and supplies over to local authorities in America and promised to reimburse them for their efforts. He committed more troops and juggled the command, replacing old war heroes with vigorous young ones. Militarily, the tide began to turn. As the British captured Louisburg, an important strategic port, and the British used to close the St. Lawrence Seaway. That is in Canada. The death blow to the French cause was struck in Quebec in 1759. Commander James Wolfe bravely sent his forces up a rocky embankment to surprise the French. The battle that followed on the Plains of Abraham killed Wolfe and the French commander, as the crucial stronghold was transferred to British hands. It would only be a matter of time before Montreal suffered the same fate. The French chapter of North American history had ended in a bloody finale. The French will come back and play later in another war, and when they sell us some stuff. The Louisiana Purchase, yes, indeed. The Royal Proclamation of 1763, or the outcome of the war. And this is where the fun begins. This is where the Royal Proclamation really does a lot to stir up some colonial feelings. They got in their feels, so to speak. Lovely map here. If you look at a map on your own of the outcome of the 7 Years' War, you'll see a better map than this. This one's kind of blurry, and I couldn't blow it up. And to be honest, like I said, you can find it out on your own. The Treaty of Paris, which marked the end of the French and Indian War, granted Britain a great deal of valuable North American land. But the new land also gave rise to a plethora of problems. The ceded territory, known as the Ohio Valley, was marked by the Appalachian Mountains in the east and the Mississippi River in the west. Don't go west, young man. Despite the acquisition of this large swath of land, the British tried to discourage American colonists from settling in it. The British already had difficulty administering the settled areas east of the Appalachians. Americans moving west would stretch British administrative resources thin. So the reason the British didn't want, in plain English, I should say, the reason why the British didn't want the colonists to expand west beyond the Appalachian Mountains, they couldn't protect them, or it was going to be much harder. So if you think about all of the territory on the eastern coast of the eventual United States being British, the British wanted to keep people there because they could easily protect them. You go out into the wilderness beyond the Appalachian Mountains, it's really tough to protect you. So that's pretty much what that means by Americans moving west would stretch British administrative resources thin. Further, just because the French government had yielded this territory to Britain did not mean the Ohio Valley's French inhabitants would readily give up their claims to land or trade routes. Scattered pockets of French settlers made the British fearful of another prolonged conflict. The war had dragged on long enough, and the British public was weary of footing the bill. Moreover, the Native Americans who had allied themselves with the French during the 7 Years' War continued to fight after the peace had been reached. Pontiac's rebellion continued after the imperial powers achieved a ceasefire. The last thing the British government wanted were hordes of American colonists crossing the Appalachians, fueling French and Native American resentment. The solution seemed simple. The Royal Proclamation of 1763 was issued, which declared the boundaries of settlement for inhabitants of the 13 colonies to be Appalachia. Proclaim and inflame. But what seemed simple to the British was not acceptable to their colonial subjects. The remedy did not address some concerns vitally important to the colonies. Colonial blood had been shed to fight the French and Indians, not to cede land to them. What was to be said for American colonists who had already settled in the West? In addition, the colonies themselves had already begun to set their sights on expanding their western boundaries, such planning sometimes even causing tension among the colonies. Why restrict their appetites to expand? Surely this must be a plot to keep the American colonists under the imperial thumb and east of the mountains where they could be watched. Consequently, this law was observed with the same reverence the colonists reserved for the mercantile laws. Scores of wagons headed westward. How could the British possibly enforce this decree? It was nearly impossible. The proclamation of 1763 merely became part of the long list of events in which the intent and actions of one side was misunderstood or disregarded by the other. That's it. So, in conclusion, the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, no matter what you call it, is an interesting little nugget for us to remember as we spend a couple weeks thinking about the philosophy of good government. And you'll learn about this guy named John Locke. John Locke believed that government should protect people's life, liberty, and property. So the proclamation of 1763 allowed or kept British colonists, or as the article calls them, American colonists, from moving west. Think about that. That proclamation, the proclamation of 1763, was meant to protect the life of British colonists. But did it protect their liberty? Did it protect their property? And a lot of British colonists said, you're restricting my liberty. You're telling me where I can't go. So I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go west. And land allows you to accrue a lot of different things. You can grow stuff on it. You can build a house on it. It's property, right? So again, that proclamation of 1763 Did it restrict people's access to property? Arguably, the answer is yes. Now, with that being said, there's still going to be some debate over how we actually treat that. Do we follow the laws? Which again goes back to Unit 6. Should British colonists listen to the Proclamation of 1763, or should they break it because they don't believe in it and prepare to suffer the consequences for their actions? So, that's the quiz. Good luck. Again, there should be a little checklist there. You've got your Canvas to-do list. Continue to be nice to the sub. Hello, sub. Yeah, good luck and see you tomorrow.